Out here again with the Buff Missionary. Like, subscribe, comment your thoughts. Let me know what you think, especially on this topic. Being back in Palau and talking about the nature. I mentioned a little bit about it yesterday. But, man, where do I start? So there's a book that I like a lot. I've appreciated a lot over the years. And I try to read through it at least once every year. And it's Steps to Christ. And this book, it gets really mind-blowing from even the first line of the book. And that line is simply, nature and revelation alike testify to God's love. And it's interesting because when people think about it these days, oftentimes they focus on the revelation part of the equation. They don't talk too much about the nature side of things. But nature and revelation alike, you could almost argue that you could substitute the word equally in there. Testify of God's love. Now, why is that important? Well, a lot of people don't believe in the Bible. A lot of people don't believe in spiritual things to that degree, but that's not something you can argue the reality of. That's not something you can argue the existence of. It's there, and it's something that we live and experience on a daily basis. Whether if people want to say water is real or not and you jump in, you're going to get wet. Like you can't avoid that. It's impossible to avoid that. But the reason I think this stuff is so cool is, like, I was thinking about my time teaching out here at Palau Mission Academy, and we would go into the classroom, and the idea is that that's where most of the education takes place, right? Inside the classroom. But the way that the school is set up, you may have seen this from some of my other videos, all the classrooms open out into nature. The hallways are outside. So to get between classes, you have to go outside. And there's a period between every class where you're walking outside to get to your next class. And it's interesting because when you consider that statement, that nature and revelation alike testify to God's love, and if you consider that learning about who God is and the reality of God and His love is the most important thing that we could ever experience, then you could argue that the most important lessons are ones that we walk by every day and never give a second thought to. The ones that are held out here in nature. Nature has very clearly, I think, become an afterthought, or definitely not appreciated to the extent or the degree that it could be for our best benefit. So, you think about it. Is it possible that, and this is the thing, you have to really go and evaluate if that statement is even potentially true. Is it possible that you could learn as much about God through nature as you could from revelation or the scripture? And I'm not going to get into all the details here, but the short answer, I believe, is yes, because when people, even if you look in the scripture at the Old Testament, people didn't have an Old Testament to refer to. That's their story being written down. What did they have? What was told them about what other people had seen and experienced through the things that they had gone through, and a lot of that happened with nature. And it's funny because a lot of people refer to, I don't know where the quote came from or where the idea came from, but nature as God's second book. And obviously the Bible tells us about creation, so it adds more to that, right? But the Bible wasn't written before creation happened. So creation actually happened first. So which one is really the first book and which one is really the second book? And I think those are the kinds of things we miss the details on, and we miss an opportunity to learn so much because we end up thinking that the only place we can learn about God and spiritual things is through the Bible. But see, we have to be willing to open our minds a little bit. Going back to what I said before, how do I reach somebody with the reality of God's love who doesn't believe in the Bible? Some people get stuck because they're trying to figure out a different way to guide the conversation to make sure that it gets back to the Bible. But we have a whole world. We have a whole world of potential evidence that we can use to our advantage when it comes to the discussion, because it doesn't matter where you go in the world, it doesn't matter what culture you're involved in, it doesn't matter what spiritual beliefs are present there. Every single one of them believes something about nature and its existence and its reality. And I'm not suggesting mysticism or any of these other different ideas where people get a little too comfortable with nature because it's nature. But the irony is that even in that, people are tapping into something that I think we miss out on, is that there is something inherently spiritual about nature, and that we can learn from nature because it's from God. And there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that or using that to our advantage when it comes to different conversations we can have with other people. So I guess another reason I thought about this is I'm in school in Michigan, right? Andrews University. And the campus, even though the campus is flat, all right? There's no mountains there in Michigan, but it's really nice at different parts of the year. You have the trees, there's a lot of different scenery. There's some trails and some different paths and things you can do. There's a lot of different ways to appreciate nature. And the way the campus is set up, it's so spread out. Like, to me, if I'm looking at it from a structural or architectural standpoint, it doesn't really make sense, because you have to go so far to get between all the different buildings, and there's a million different ways you can get from one place to another on the campus. But all of it is happening walking through nature. But the question again comes up, do people realize the potential lessons that they could be walking past? What can we learn about God and His love through the trees, through the seasons, through the water, through the clouds, through the sky, through even the sun? You know, there's different lessons and illustrations that can teach us so much. But you look around today, and when people are walking between class, their minds are shut off to learning, because to them, learning only happens inside that classroom. And we're missing the fact that when we leave those boxes of classrooms, we're actually stepping out into the biggest classroom ever of nature, right? But even more so today, because when we go between classes and when we leave those areas where we think we're doing all the learning we can, what do? We get down on our phones, we look down, we can't even acknowledge the people walking beside us. And just on a basic human to human level, we miss out on all that interaction. But what about the divine and spiritual interaction that we could get if we looked up just a little bit more to see what we could learn from the nature and the beauty that surrounds us? Nature and revelation alike testify of God and His love. I think the Bible is a very specific revelation of God's love, but I think nature is an even bigger and more general and perhaps even more ready to be accepted revelation of God's love if we would take the time to learn the lessons there and start sharing those with the people around us. So the question remains, are we paying attention? That's what it comes down to at the end of the day. Are we paying attention? It would be a shame to think of us as ourselves as educated and pursuing all these degrees and learning so much, but to never take advantage of the biggest classroom that we all get to be in. And I'm not gonna lie, being out here in Palau, I definitely appreciate it more. I think that's obvious. And it's easier to connect to it in a place like this just because the nature blows your mind so much, but it doesn't mean that in different places and different types of nature settings that there are not just as many lessons to be learned there. That's what creation was given for us to be able to experience God and His love. So my encouragement to you is to stop walking with your head down when you go between those classes and those places where you think you're getting all your education. Take a moment, pause in the great book of nature, the great classroom of nature, and see what you can learn about God and His love from there, and you'll find something that'll have a profound impact on you that you'll be able to share with someone else in an awesome way too. That's not going to come across as just you're trying to convert someone to believe in a book that many people may or may not have an appreciation for. But anyways, there's a lot of different ways you can go with this. And what I want to do is a couple things from here. I want to share some of the lessons that I've learned through nature and my experience with nature about God and his love. And I also want to keep working through this book, Steps to Christ, because there's so much here that I feel is so relevant for us now that we miss out on because of where we think our education is supposed to come from. So yeah, this is just the beginning, and that was just the first line of the book, so you can only imagine there's a lot more to come. But anyways, it's the Buff Missionary. Like, subscribe, comment, let me know what you think down in the comments, and we out here, and we out.